So this is our panel today on, it's going to be focused on generative AI. And we know that AI has been in the forefront of emerging technology for some time now, a few years now. But since the emergence of generative AI, I think there's been an explosion between tech, policy, business on what this technology is, how it's going to affect us, and I think the list goes on. So we want to start our panel with Bratton, where we know everyone's talking about generative AI. Everyone has something to say. Everybody wants to be involved in this growth. But can you explain to us what exactly is generative AI?
Sure, and thank you, Olivia. So generative AI is really a continuation of all of the investments and research that has been happening in AI and machine learning for the past 2 decades, and much of that happening in Amazon, as Max talked about with Alexa and Amazon.com, Amazon Go, and so on. And just to give you a sense of how much AI has evolved over the past few years and the rate at which it has happened, if you think of the compute revolution, the IT revolution, that was driven by Moore's law. And Moore's law doubled compute every 18 months. Over the last 6 to 7 years in AI, we have been able to double the system compute every 3.5 months. So it has been going at about 6 times the speed that IT has been going at. And so what that has done is, let's say if you go back to 2017, 2018, the state-of-the-art machine learning models used to be tens of millions of parameters, maybe 15, 17 million parameters. And you can think of parameters as knobs that you have in a model that lets you control how the model behaves. By 2019, that went to 300 million parameters. So in 2 years, it increased by like 20x. And these models were actually demonstrated at scale, running for the first time by AWS. And in fact, they were in Andy Jassi's keynotes at re:Invent. And now these models have hundreds of billions of parameters. So in a space of 3-4 years, you've seen almost 1,000x increase in the capabilities of these models. And what that has happened is you're now able to take these and train them on internet scale data, on terabytes of audio, text, images, and so on and so forth. And as a result, what has happened with these models is they used to be really good at predicting things and get insights from data. And now these models, because we have trained them with so much data, have made them capable of generating content, generating things like text and video and audio and so on and so forth. And so they've moved to a stage where they were predictive and they could help you get insights from data and act on those insights, to now becoming assistants for some creative tasks, like generating ad copies and generating drafts of documents and so on.
That's fascinating. And then Kathleen, can you tell us exactly what you do at your company in terms of AI and how you all are using AI?
Sure, absolutely. So I work for Maximus. So we are a big systems integrator and developer of AI, and primarily help the federal government as well as US states and international, but really coming at from the usage side of the house. How do we help with the mission problems that they're doing? So taking together those different types of emerging technologies to really get mission outcomes. I'd be remiss if I didn't say is also understanding how to do that responsibly. So not every case requires AI, or should it be ready for it yet. So it's really looking at how and where it's most appropriate, and really thinking about how you kind of demystify it. So if you think about generative and some of the previous parts of AI, a lot of it was going through and finding trends in data. Then doing it, analyzing it, and analysis on there. Now it's taking things and being able to put it together. So I think you mentioned as well, we are really looking at how to help assist humans to do what they're really good at, which is critical thinking and their creativity. So not to replace, not to do that, but how do we help them and do the things that they say? So many times people say things like, I have to do this in order to do my real job. We want to really bring down the amount of time of doing this and getting them to be able to do more of what they're really good at.
And then I want to note we have bicameral, bipartisan leadership on stage today. And I think that Congress or Washington is known as not being as cooperative, but I think this is a great example of how Congress is really going to work together, because this is such an important area. And so I'm going to turn to our members of Congress and ask, we'll start with Rep. Liu. What are the biggest questions you're getting from constituents right now surrounding generative AI?
So thank you, Olivia, for that question. Thank you for moderating. And I want to say I'm honored to be at this panel, and particularly with Senator Rounds, because there's nothing particularly partisan about AI. And I think it's really something that's going to be quite disruptive to society. So I think for a lot of people, they just want to know where this is headed. And I've thought about this a lot, and my study conclusion is I have no idea. Because we know it's developing very rapidly. My analogy of this is sort of like the steam engine, which was quite disruptive when it was invented. But in a few years, AI is going to be like a supersonic jet engine with a personality. And I think we need to be prepared for it. It's going to essentially eliminate a number of professions. It's going to make some other professions more efficient. It's going to create new jobs. But it's hard to know where this is all headed, especially when you're now matching this with amazing advancements in hardware. The Aurora supercomputer just came online in Chicago. And then you have quantum computing that may happen. And then when you pair these two things together, it is not clear at all, right, what ChatGPT version 8 looks like in 5 years. So I think my constituents are anxious. They want to know what might happen. I think the best thing is to be transparent. And as a legislator, I want to make sure that we get all the inputs. So I'm working on bipartisan legislation to create a blue ribbon bipartisan commission to make recommendations to Congress as to what kinds of AI we might want to regulate and how we might want to go about doing that.
And Senator Round, same question. And then as you co-chair the Senate AI caucus, what are some of your constituents and then also fellow members of Congress asking you about generative AI?
Well, look, first of all, thanks for the opportunity. And Ted is right. It is bipartisan right now in the House and the Senate. We are working together. We recognize that we don't have all the answers and that this is something which will change the way that we do business. And it's going to change very, very rapidly. And the changes aren't going to be something that are going to happen in the future. They have already started, and that we are trying to do our best to literally begin to understand what it is. If you're back home and you're talking with constituents, one of the questions they're going to ask is what exactly is it? How do you explain it? What's the difference between this and just a normal computer system that they're used to right now? And how many Trekkies have we got out there? We got a few Trekkie fans in the middle of this thing here. I kind of look at it and I say, look, y'all remember Spock, who was the logical man on Star Trek. And yet at the same time, there was one particular story that I just can't get out of my mind every time I think about artificial intelligence, and that is you're now starting to talk about a computer that uses not just logic, a deductive logic, but now an inductive side of logic as well. Spock, in the middle of one of his more famous sessions, is actually trying to escape from one of the planets out there in the shuttlecraft, and the Enterprise is trying to get back to help and save them, and Spock takes the shuttle off and it heads on out and he's running out of fuel. And the Enterprise isn't quite there to rescue them yet. And Spock, with Bones in there with him, he looks around and Spock is basically deducting now that he's not going to have enough fuel to make orbit. What's he going to do? And Bones is saying, what are you going to do? We're not going to make it. How are we going to do this? And Spock looks over and pulls back the fuel release and blows out all the remaining fuel and lights it. And Bones goes crazy. Spock, have you gone mad? Are you nuts? Ignites it. The Enterprise from way on out says, we see him. There's the flare. And Scotty beams them up. Afterwards, as they talk to Spock, wouldn't it have been logical to save your fuel? Yes. But at the same time, if he's going to accomplish his mission, he had to do something inductively. He had to look at what the options were that hadn't been thought about, which was to save them. That's what generative AI does for us today. It goes beyond the deductive side of logic and introduces imagination into the middle of this. It's the reason why we're concerned about what this particular kind of AI can do. You do a ChatGPT, and it doesn't just lay out a deductive report back to you. It actually will make up some things for you once in a while. It starts to imagine a little bit. This is deductive and inductive AI. So when you try to explain that to folks back home, you want to let them know that this is something which is here already. It's not going to go away, and it's not a matter of trying to hide from it. It's a matter of how do we do a good job of protecting ourselves from the bad parts, but taking advantage of all of the opportunities that this country has to use the best and brightest minds in the world for the good of everybody. And because if we don't do it, our adversaries will be doing it, and they're going to be doing it as quickly as they possibly can. How do you balance those? That's the public policy question that we're challenged with today.
Something interesting that both of you said about the anxiousness of your constituents, or making sure that we have analogies that you can give to people back home. And what's unique about the two of you is that you represent the Los Angeles area, and then you have a lot of rural constituents. And Bratton, you can speak to this, but AWS is doing a really, really phenomenal job of making sure that we're democratizing the tech, and we're democratizing access to the tech, education to the tech. We're focused on non-traditional tech communities, whether it's rural areas, inner cities, et cetera, community colleges. So what is something that you would say that like members or people in the audience can take home to the non-technical reader, or someone who's not leading in Congress, or someone who doesn't work in policy, or someone who's not building the technology or working in it for years like Kathleen? Like, what are some things, high-level talking points that we could say that you need to know about generative AI?
You know, Representative Liu and Senator Rounds touched on two really important things. One is transparency, and the other is making sure we use this in a responsible way. And so building AI and machine learning systems in a responsible way has really been a foundational tenet for us at Amazon. And, you know, given the fact that we have been doing this for 20 years, you know, both machine learning as well as AI, making sure that we put in the right guardrails so that we guard against things like bias and toxicity, and ensure that things are explainable and that privacy is protected and robustness is there. These are really foundational to how we build our machine learning systems. And so when we came out with Amazon Bedrock, we actually anchored on a few tenets. One of those tenets is we need to give customers choice. You know, there's not going to be just one single model. You want to be able to give choice across a variety of factors, closed source and open source models, so people can inspect what they're looking at and they can make the right informed decisions. The other thing is privacy of data. So the way we would use models within Amazon is, let's say a customer uses it and they want to customize it on their data. They get their own private copy of the model. So it's a paradigm of you take the model to the data. And then, as Representative Liu, you were saying, transparency is really important. So what we have done, in some ways, you know, we pioneered this in the industry, was to come out with this concept of AI service cards, where we go in and talk in great detail about all of the things Senator Rounds were talking about, extremely important things, like how do you make sure you have accurately curated the data set and there's no bias and toxicity and the hallucinations have been reduced to a minimum? How do you make sure that we are putting in the right privacy guardrails? How do you make sure there's the right robustness in there? And so in those terms, you know, I'm glad that you brought these up, because responsible AI is such a foundational tenet for us. And the fact that we have such a deep legacy in this space actually puts us in a unique position to be able to get all this into our products. And that's really how we have developed Amazon Bedrock, which gives people access to foundational models. And I'll give another example. So Amazon Code Whisperer, you know, that uses generative AI to generate software code. And, you know, we have seen tests, customers like Accenture and others use it, and they have found that software developers are now 30% more productive. But more than that, up until now, you had to learn a software language, like whether it's a Python or a Java or something. Now, everybody who knows English is a software developer. And so imagine the amount of creativity that comes out of it. And one of the things we did to, you know, both the points that Senator Rounds and Representative Liu you mentioned, is the fact that we really built in guardrails around responsible generation of software, like making sure the right copyright attributes were there, making sure the right licensing was there, and so that we could actually use it in those situations. So, you know, I agree with the panelists, and that is really what is so foundational for how at AWS we are building our services, and I think the industry will also move in that direction.
Thank you. I have a question. I'm going to go back to the members, and then Kathleen, I'd like you to give your opinion here on, there's going to be policy that's emerging as a result of this, and you know, outside of those who are building, I think a lot of us are still learning as we go. Like, what are your ways of working with your caucuses to say, okay, this is how we're going to get smart on this, and this is how we're going to implement policy? or is that something that's still being worked on?
So I think for many of us, we're still in learning mode, right? We're just trying to get information. So I'm vice chair of the Democratic Caucus. I work with Mike Johnson, vice chair of the Republican Caucus, and we held a bipartisan dinner where we're going to bring in speakers to talk about AI. Our first speaker happened to be Sam Altman. And it was 2.5 hours long. It was just sort of learning about generative AI and ChatGPT and how it worked. And I know Senator Rounds will speak to this. The Senate is about to do 3 sort of briefings on AI. So I think we're just trying to learn at this point, because if you write an act of Congress and it's wrong, you need another act of Congress to correct that. So we want to be careful in how we proceed.
Yeah, and I agree with Ted. Look, we're doing this on a bipartisan basis. Senator Schumer, the leader in the Senate, asked if we would get together on a bipartisan basis, 2 Republicans, 2 Democrats, including himself, and act as a focal point where we could bring in all the different ideas and kind of organize information gathering in the United States Senate. Leader McConnell agreed and thought it was a good idea. So now we've got 4 of us that are leading this. We've started out, we've announced 3 different informational meetings. The first 2 are, while they are private for members of the Senate to come on in and sit down, they can visit and actually ask questions without having to do it in front of the press, so to speak. The third one will be a classified one in which we talk about the defensive needs of our country, the offensive capabilities that we have, and the offensive capabilities of our adversaries using AI and how they're incorporating that already on the battlefield. So we're trying to do that. The other piece of this is sharing how do we go about setting up and discussing and taking responsibility on a committee-by-committee basis for the different aspects. You know, ag uses a lot of computer power right now, just in terms of the more complicated parts of specifically laying out the types of fertilizers in particular areas on larger fields. But along with that, you've also got the Department of Health and what they're doing right now. I mean, look, we can do a lot of things when it comes to curing cancer if we use this product and invest right now. The Department of Defense has real interests in this. So when you look at all those things, which particular committee, is it the Judiciary Committee or whatever? And the practical side is we have to figure out who takes the lead in the Senate and in the House as far as laying out the different ideas, assembling them, and putting in legislation. And how do you do that so that we promote its use within our country, and at the same time that we protect those areas that citizens are expecting us to protect, whether it's privacy, whether it's just literally keeping the bad guys out of their personal information and out of their bank accounts. How do we go about doing that, and which particular committees? Those are the practical, hands-on side of things that we're still trying to get our hands around. Right now, we're letting everybody bring in their ideas, and then we'll begin the process of making recommendations to the Senate about how we proceed in terms of either a select committee, a blue ribbon committee, or splitting it out and having lots of different committees come up with different pieces of legislation. Let's not decide that yet, but let's recognize that this is all part of the process moving forward in how we move on AI.
And Kathleen, any recommendations you have for the members or just people who are trying to get smart on the technology?
Yeah, so I'll give one from kind of personal and one from kind of the professional side of it too. So I'll start with the personal one. You know, just start trying to use it, but don't put in, understand a little bit enough to not put in private information, things that, you know, you don't want out there, but general questions. So I'll give an example. Last night, hopefully my son's not watching this. Last night, my 14, almost 15-year-old son, he's in algebra in middle school. It's like 8 o'clock. I'm tired. I've done all the stuff during the day. He's like, I know I'm missing something on this problem. I can't quite get it. So, you know, when he's in the other room, I'm like, so what I put in there, and the prompts were not only give me the answer, but give me instructions on how to teach somebody the logical steps to walk through this. And then he also had, but the important part of this is, he has a computer program that he's putting things into, so it would validate, it could check if he was doing like the right steps, but it wouldn't give him the answers ahead of time. So what I was able to do is start helping him for those things and give them to, but then he was able to check it. So that's one of the big things. So in the professional side of the house, we actually did a group within Maximus for our internal communications, did a great type of testing of it. They wanted to test like internal communications blurbs, things that would be sent out, and what would be the preferences of the actual employees. So they did kind of some testing without actually letting everybody know, where they had probably about 20 different scenarios, and they would have, do you prefer this write-up, or this write-up? The first write-up was all generative. Second write-up, all human. Third write-up was generative plus human. Across the board, and again, I want to be clear, smaller sample size, it wasn't massive, but it was a decent size. Across the board, generative plus human. So scored the highest. But again, you're validating it. So when you think about using these things and whether you're putting it in, somebody's writing stuff, if you have a first-year employee, let's say they've been there a month, do you let anything that they've created just go out without somebody checking it, fact-checking it, or reviewing it and understanding it? Those are the types of things that we're doing already. So we're already making sure that we have kind of checks and balances of what are the guides of, hey, are you doing it this way? What is it used for? How is it used? Also, who is going to be the end user? That matters a lot. So are you putting something really powerful into the hands of somebody who doesn't have the skills and understanding of how to do it? That's not responsible. So how are you doing it just because they paid you to do it doesn't mean it's necessarily a right thing to do. So how are you putting those things in of, hey, this is when it's appropriate? Also, the data is really important. So some of the generative capabilities are being able to take off the open web and just apply to your own areas. That's great, but again, you have the data. What comes in that's in that data is going to be really, really important. So the things that are out there, it's not necessarily bad data. Is it appropriate to use in those particular use cases? One of the things that I'm actually really excited about generative is for those of us who are in AI, it's always about getting good quality data or labeled data and getting all of these things, and especially trying to cover, for diversity, for better quality, you're trying to cover so many different types that require so much labeled data of all these different types of use cases. So now imagine if you can help generate those edge use cases or those things that are better, giving you a better representative data set. So there's a lot of things going on, but I would say the most important to walk away with is test and validate. Validate the output, validate the things that are in there, and for how you're using it.
May I just cut in, because I really think what you're hitting on here is a great area that's got to be explored on it, and that is transparency with regard to what's actually happening. If you're an individual and you're using AI in delivering your work product, if you were to end up with a result which was bad at the end of it, it's still bad whether you used AI or you did it yourself. Therefore, you are still responsible for your work product. But if you're delivering your work product and you are assuming that other people are looking at it and they think it's yours, if you're plagiarizing, if you're using AI on it and you don't disclose that and you don't lay out the logic behind it and the reasoning behind it as to how you got there, then we've got a problem. And I think that's part of what we're going to have to address is the continuation of responsibility through that process. And when we talk about incorporating AI, that doesn't change the fact that if the outcome is positive or negative, that you still give recognition to how that process was achieved, the algorithms that were used or the data sets that were used in it. I think that's part of what we're going to be struggling with in terms of regulation, even on the light side of the AI products that are out there, or what are going to be developed in the future.
That's a good segue to our next topic, where we're going to talk about what's already happening with generative AI. And I'll turn to Bratton first to give a few use cases.
Yeah, and we are seeing customers use it in all kinds of ways, both in the public sector as well as in the commercial sector. And some of it doesn't also need generative AI, as Kathleen was mentioning. So if you take an example, Department of Veterans Affairs, they have been using generative AI to see how they make it easier for benefits recipients to understand what kind of benefits they are eligible for. So you just go to the website and easily answer those questions. And then we have been working with the government in Brazil to create something for attorneys so that attorneys can go in and ask questions and say, can you give me details about this case, or what were the arguments in this particular case, and so on. And then we have also been working with authorities in tax authorities in Canada, where you can get your financial situation and then it'll tell you what kind of benefits that you are able to get. And this is getting truly democratized. That's, one of the things that the industry has done, one of the things that Amazon has done, and I'll give you a couple of examples. So, we have Coke Industries. Coke Industries uses one of our machine learning services, Monitron, to monitor when their equipment is going to get bad. And the machine learning is actually able to predict when those machines need repair. And as a result, they have been able to save millions of dollars. And not just that, this has now been taken to a state where technicians are able to use this app. So you're truly democratizing this. And then, in healthcare, we have situations where you're using precision medicine and you're able to do remote medicine and telemedicine and so on. So, this is something that's starting to get really pervasive. Software, as I said, people are getting a lot more productive, and we really see customers being able to use it across the board, both in the public sector as well as in the commercial sector.
I think those use cases are really prevalent because I think we tend to talk about, the guardrails that need to be in place and of course being responsible, but sometimes we forget the good that this technology can have. And I think those are really profound use cases. Kathleen, is there something in particular with your work at Maximus, a use case that you've been incredibly proud of that you'd like to share?
Yeah, so I can talk in general for some of the things. What we're starting to see is a lot of the usages of it and putting it in for summarization. But again, summarization off of a smaller set of trusted data, things that you would know what it was going to be put for. Also, it's kind of a starter. So, how many guys, who's written a job description ever in their life? Was that fun? Was that a fun thing you want to do? We're literally being able to use it as a starter right now to generate you a job description or a set of open things that are out there about, let's say, requirements or things that you would have. But then you're going to go through. You're going to go through and be like, nah, I don't really need that. I do. It acts as a starter. So a lot of the times we have very limited time to do certain things. We may have an hour. So you spend most of the hour trying to get the mechanics down, the things that have to be in there. Then you spend maybe, a couple minutes on the creative side of how to really think about that. That's where it can start right now. So some of those things of where you're doing it. Also code. So, maybe not all of you are coders, but in thinking about that, that's another language. So the ability to go through, use maybe not generative ones, but be able to go to search code for vulnerabilities, but then use the generative side to recommend code that might be safer, that doesn't have the vulnerabilities there. Or as we see it progressing, be able to actually, when people are writing code, recommend. A lot of people copy code from all over the place or pull it from some of the existing things that they have, but be able to pull from a set of code that's already done, been trusted and gone through all the appropriate security screenings, things that you would need there. But the other one that, as I mentioned earlier, that I'm really excited about is generating edge use case data. So data that can be used for other types of training. So whether that's computer vision or other things, because there's a lot of people who have, let's say in the healthcare field, they have some really rare types of diseases, and some of these models are not trained on their stuff because it's very discrete, nuanced cases. That may help start opening up the ability to get a broader set of representation.
And for our members, so when we talk about use cases, are there particular use cases that you have used? I think an example always helps people digest something or understand it more. And I know you said that everyone in Congress is still in the learning stages of this, but you have a computer science degree, one of the few members in Congress that have a computer science degree, Rep. Blue. And so what are the use cases or what are the examples that you give to other members to kind of have them digest this?
So I did introduce the first piece of federal legislation completely written by AI. And I also did the first completely AI-generated press release. I just want to note my amazing staff did insert a sentence basically saying, we just want to note no one's going to get fired because of this. As a legislator, right, I'm less concerned about all their amazing sort of uses of what AI can do. I'm sort of more concerned about, well, what are their sort of disruptive effects on society? And so, for example, you had said that software programmers are 30% more efficient now with using AI. Amazon has Code Whisperer that helps you complete your software code. A number of generative AI applications that can just write software code. So for a number of software programmers, they are more efficient now using AI. And they would be able to do that in a 4-day work week and be more efficient than a software programmer not using AI in a 5-day work week. So what do we do with that? By the way, my vote is we go to a 4-day work week. But there's going to be these disruptions, right? And
you want us to work more than what we are now?
So do we just make everyone work harder? Or do we actually give people maybe some more leisure time to do other things? So those are things I think the private sector and public sector have to think about.
And Senator Rounds, any use case specifics for you?
2 specifics, and I'll try to do them quickly. The first one I would call the ugly. John Antal, retired colonel, wrote a book called 7 Seconds to Die. It's the story of the Nagorno-Karabakh war between Azerbaijan and Armenia in September of 2020. Azerbaijan wanted back Nagorno-Karabakh, which is a mountain range between the 2 countries. Armenia had armed it. They used Korean War-style weapon systems, tanks. They had it embedded. They'd had it for 20 years. They built in huge defenses. Armenia went to Israel and some other countries and purchased not just Turkish TB2 drones, but they also purchased loitering munitions. The loitering munitions were launched. They would go over, they would identify a kill zone, specifically in the Nagorno-Karabakh region. In that, they could identify what was a tank, what was an armored personnel carrier, what were personnel, what was a soft target. Those drones that had been launched without any human intervention would identify which target they wanted to kill. They would communicate between themselves without human intervention, and they pick which target and which type of munition was needed. And once they had done that within the kill zone, without any human authorization other than to be put into the kill zone, they would then take out all of those targets using the best available munition that they had on board. That is on the battlefield today with 2 countries that you would not necessarily imagine being very adept at using artificial intelligence, and yet it exists right now. That's the bad side. If there's a good side, I lost my wife to sarcoma 1 year, 7 months, 5 days ago. But in that struggle, about 3 years, we discovered different types of sarcoma that doctors over a 2-year period of time couldn't treat and then could treat because of advancements using artificial intelligence. She got a brain tumor as part of the progression of the disease. We thought that was the end. Using computer systems that were there and new technologies that did not exist 2 years earlier, they could take out those tumors, literally giving her 6 months more life. We need to take advantage of all of the future capabilities that AI has to offer. The sooner, the better. Quality of life can be significantly enhanced if we invest now in technology advancements in this country. You can't take that away. You can't get back the time if we delay, but you can make a huge difference for a lot of people if you push to use this for the right purposes.
I don't think it's fair for any of us to follow that. That was such a touching story. Thank you for sharing that with us. And I think that's just a great way for us to end this panel in looking at the promise of this technology, but also knowing that the onus is on all of us to make sure that it's done responsibly, whether it's on a political nature or from an industry-leading perspective. And I thank all of you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.